The road into Ashford Hollow looks like it leads nowhere. Two narrow lanes wind through endless forests of dark pine and maple, the branches leaning over the asphalt like they're trying to hide the sky. Even during the day, sunlight barely touches the ground. For most people driving through the mountains of northern Pennsylvania, Ashford Hollow is just another forgotten town. A gas station. A diner. A population barely over 2,000. But for those who have studied its history, Ashford Hollow is something else entirely. Because for nearly 40 years, people have been disappearing there. And no one has ever explained why. The first disappearance that made national news happened in the summer of 1986. A 17-year-old girl named Emily Harper left her house just after sunset to meet friends by the river that runs along the edge of town. She never arrived. Her parents reported her missing before midnight. Police searched the woods. Volunteers combed the riverbanks with flashlights and dogs. Nothing. No footprints. No clothing. No signs of a struggle. Just a quiet road leading into the forest. Over the next 2 weeks, the search grew larger. Helicopters circled the mountains. State investigators joined the case. But Emily Harper had simply vanished. Locals told reporters the same thing over and over. People get lost in these woods. But something about that explanation never felt right. Because the woods around Ashford Hollow weren't some massive wilderness. Trails ran through them. Hunters knew every hill and valley. And Emily had grown up there. She knew those woods better than anyone. Then, 5 years later, it happened again. This time it was a man named Daniel Brooks, 32 years old. A mechanic who worked at the small garage near the town square. One Friday night after closing the shop, Daniel stopped at the diner on Main Street. He ordered coffee and pie, joked with the waitress, and paid his bill around 9:40 p.m. Several customers saw him walk out to the parking lot. But Daniel never made it home. His truck was found the next morning parked beside the road just outside town. The driver's door was open. The keys were still in the ignition. And the headlights were still on. But Daniel Brooks was gone. Police searched for days. Once again, nothing was found. No footprints leading into the woods. No tire tracks suggesting another vehicle. Just an empty truck in a dark forest. After that case, people in Ashford Hollow began locking their doors earlier. Parents told their kids not to wander at night. But life continued the way it always had. Small towns have a way of burying fear under routine. Until the disappearances started happening more often. A college student hiking through the area vanished during a weekend trip. A couple traveling through town stopped for gas and were never seen again. A retired teacher disappeared while walking her dog on a familiar trail. Every case looked the same. No struggle. No witnesses. No bodies. Just people who walked into Ashford Hollow and never came back out. Detectives from outside the county began calling it something unofficial. The Hollow Pattern. Because nearly every disappearance happened within 5 miles of the same place. An area locals simply called the Hollow. It's a stretch of forest just beyond the river, where the hills dip sharply and the trees grow thicker than anywhere else in the county. Satellite maps show nothing unusual. Just trees. But locals say the woods there feel wrong. Hunters claim their compasses spin. Hikers report hearing sounds in the distance that don't echo the way they should. And some residents refuse to drive that road after dark. Not because of animals. Because of what they believe lives in the forest. But no one talks about that part publicly. In a small town like Ashford Hollow, rumors spread fast. And once they start, they can change the way outsiders see the place. So the sheriff's office always gave the same explanation. People get lost. Sometimes they suggested hikers wandered too far and succumbed to the wilderness. Other times they hinted someone might be committing crimes in the woods and leaving no trace. But after decades of disappearances, investigators still had no suspects. No evidence. And no answers. By 2023, Ashford Hollow had mostly faded from national attention. The cases were cold. The missing posters had long since faded under rain and sunlight. And for most Americans, the town didn't exist anymore. Until a journalist named Claire Donovan arrived. Claire worked for an online crime magazine known for investigating unsolved cases. She had spent years covering missing persons stories across the United States and Europe. And one thing about Ashford Hollow caught her attention immediately. The numbers. Official police records listed 13 disappearances tied to the area. But when Claire started digging through newspaper archives and local reports, she discovered something strange. The real number might be much higher. 22 people. Possibly more. And almost all of them had vanished near the same patch of forest. The Hollow. Claire arrived in town on a gray October afternoon. Ashford Hollow looked exactly the way you'd expect. Quiet streets. Old brick buildings. A diner with a flickering neon sign. The kind of place where strangers stand out immediately. As she checked into the town's only motel, the elderly woman behind the counter asked a simple question. "You passing through?" Claire smiled politely. "Just working on a story." The woman paused. "What kind of story?" Claire hesitated for a moment before answering. "Disappearances." The woman's expression changed instantly. Not fear. Something closer to resignation. Like she had heard that word too many times. That evening, Claire sat inside the diner on Main Street. The same diner where Daniel Brooks had eaten his last slice of pie decades earlier. She spread newspapers across the table, studying the timeline she had built. Each case pointed back to the same area. The Hollow. And every investigator who had looked into it had eventually left with nothing. Except questions. Claire closed her notebook and stared out the diner window. Across the street stood the road leading toward the forest. It disappeared into darkness just beyond the last streetlight. The waitress approached with a refill of coffee. "You're not from around here," she said. Claire shook her head. "I'm writing about the missing people." The waitress froze slightly. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "You should leave that alone." Claire frowned. "Why?" The waitress glanced toward the dark road outside. Then she said something that would stay with Claire for the rest of her life. "Because everyone who goes looking for answers in the Hollow eventually disappears too." Claire Donovan didn't believe in curses. She believed in patterns, evidence, and the kind of human mistakes that leave traces behind. Every unsolved case in her experience had one thing in common. Someone had overlooked something. But as she stepped outside the diner that night and looked toward the dark road leading into the forest, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hesitation. The town was quiet. Too quiet. No traffic. No distant music. No voices. Just the low hum of wind brushing through trees that stood like shadows at the edge of the streetlights. Claire shook it off. Fear was exactly what kept cases like this unsolved. And she wasn't here to be afraid. The next morning, Claire started with the sheriff's office. Sheriff Mark Ellison had been in charge for nearly 15 years. He greeted her with a firm handshake and the kind of guarded expression that suggested he'd already decided how much he was willing to say. "You're not the first reporter to come here," he said. Claire nodded. "But I might be the one who stays long enough to figure it out." Ellison didn't smile. Instead, he pulled a file from his desk and placed it in front of her. Inside were photographs. Missing persons reports. Maps with circles drawn around the same area. The Hollow. "You see a pattern," Claire said. "I see a lot of people who made bad decisions," Ellison replied. "Hiking alone. Driving at night. Going off trail." Claire flipped through the photos. Emily Harper. Daniel Brooks. Faces frozen in time. 22 people, she said quietly. "That's not bad decisions. That's something else." Ellison leaned back in his chair. "Let me give you some advice," he said. "Write your story. Talk to whoever you want. But don't go into those woods alone." Claire met his eyes. "What's in the Hollow?" For a moment, the sheriff didn't answer. Then he said something that didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a fact. "Nothing you'll be able to explain." That afternoon, Claire met with locals. Most of them didn't want to talk. Some refused to even say the word Hollow. But one man agreed to meet her behind the gas station on the edge of town. His name was Walter Green. 68 years old. Born and raised in Ashford Hollow. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands and stared toward the distant tree line. "You're asking the wrong questions," he said. Claire raised an eyebrow. "What should I be asking?" Walter exhaled slowly. "Not who took them." Pause. "But what?" Claire felt a chill run through her. "You think something in the woods is responsible?" Walter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the forest. "You ever notice how quiet it gets out there?" he asked. Claire nodded slightly. "Animals don't stay long in that part," he continued. "Hunters stopped going there years ago. Not because they couldn't find anything, but because something always felt like it was watching them." Claire crossed her arms. "That's a feeling. Not evidence." Walter looked at her then, his eyes sharp. "Daniel Brooks was my nephew." That stopped her. "He knew those woods better than anyone," Walter said. "If he walked into them, he didn't get lost." Claire's voice softened. "What do you think happened to him?" Walter flicked his cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his boot. "I think," he said slowly, "something in that hollow doesn't want people to leave." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She sat at the small desk in her motel room, reviewing everything she had gathered. Maps. timelines, witness statements, and one detail kept repeating. Every disappearance happened after dark. Every single one. Claire stared at the map again. The road leading into the hollow curved sharply after the last streetlight. And beyond that, no cameras, no houses, no witnesses, just forest. At 11:42 p.m., Claire made a decision. If she wanted answers, she had to go there herself. The road into the hollow was even darker at night. Claire's headlights cut through the blackness, illuminating trees that seemed to close in tighter the farther she drove. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the forest was pressing in on the road. After about 5 minutes, she reached the spot marked on nearly every case file. A narrow clearing beside the road. This was where Daniel Brooks' truck had been found. Claire parked her car and turned off the engine. Silence. Not normal silence. The kind that feels like something is missing. No insects. No wind. No distant sounds. Just nothing. She stepped out of the car. The cold hit her immediately. It was at least 10 degrees colder than it had been in town. Claire pulled her jacket tighter and turned on her flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing trees that looked almost identical in every direction. No landmarks. No paths. Just endless forest. Then she heard it. A sound. Faint. Somewhere deeper in the woods. It wasn't an animal. It sounded wrong. Like something trying to mimic a human voice. Claire froze. Her instincts told her to get back in the car. To leave. To come back during the day with backup. But curiosity pushed her forward. One step. Then another. The sound came again. Closer this time. A whisper. Not clear enough to understand. But unmistakably human. Claire turned slowly, scanning the trees. "Hello?" she called out. No response. Just silence again. Then, a crack. Somewhere behind her. Claire spun around, her flashlight shaking slightly. The beam landed on something in the distance. At first, she thought it was a person. Standing between the trees. Perfectly still. But something about it felt off. Too tall. Too thin. And it didn't move. Claire's heart began to race. "Is someone there?" she called again. No answer. The figure didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't react. It just stood there. Watching. Then her flashlight flickered. Once. Twice. And for a split second. The figure was closer. Much closer. Claire stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. "That's not possible," she whispered. The distance between them had been at least 20 feet. Now it was half that. And she hadn't seen it move. The whispering sound returned. Louder now. All around her. Not one voice. Multiple. Overlapping. Calling out in broken, distorted tones. Some of them sounded like cries for help. Others sounded like something pretending to be human. Claire turned and ran. Branches snapped beneath her feet as she sprinted back toward the road. The whispers followed. Getting louder. Closer. Faster. She burst out of the trees and into the clearing, gasping for air. Her car sat exactly where she had left it. Headlights off. Doors closed. Everything normal. Too normal. Claire yanked the driver's door open and jumped inside. Her hands shook as she shoved the key into the ignition. The engine turned over. Once. Twice. Then. It died. The whispering stopped. Completely. And in the silence, Claire slowly looked up. Through the windshield. Standing in the middle of the road. Blocking her way out. Was the same figure. Closer than ever before. And this time, it smiled.